Married life was too dull, so I kept a canary for amusement. Unexpectedly, the news reached my arranged marriage husband's ears. From that day on, he started coming home frequently. Even with all sorts of tricks. Until one day he asked, "When will you take me to see the canary you're keeping outside?" What exactly attracts you to him? I was stunned. You want to see? After getting a positive response, I took him to see the bird I kept. A Gloucester canary.
Welcome to listen to my full Sweet Love series novel. I'm the blogger and I'm Twilight's novel. Now let's start the main story.
Stephen and I were a couple brought together by a business marriage. Although we had known each other since childhood, we weren't close. After marriage, he focused on his career, and I focused on mine. Spending little time together was the norm. Especially in the past 2 or 3 months, Stephen had overseas collaborations, often flying away for more than half a month at a time. My friends all joked that being married was almost the same as not being married. You always said you wanted the good life where your husband isn't home but still gives you money. But with a husband as top tier as yours, I don't know if you're losing or gaining by him not being home. Speaking of which, Elizabeth, your married life is no different from being single. Besides work, it's all social engagements. Isn't it boring? Haven't you thought about finding some other fun? Boring? It was indeed a bit. So that day, while driving past the flower and bird market, I found myself inexplicably going in for a look. When I came out, besides a bunch of white lisianthus in my hand, I also had a bird cage. I had bought a plump, bright yellow bird. The seller said it was a Gloucester canary. The bird cage was filled with chirping sounds, loud and cheerful, making my heart leap with joy. I didn't take the canary back home but settled it in a villa under my name, having the housekeeper take special care of it. The marital home was where Stephen and I lived together. I couldn't just keep something there without his consent. On the day I became a bird owner, I shared my joy with my best friend. For some reason, it was very noisy on Lily's end. She seemed unable to hear me clearly and had to put me on speakerphone. I unconsciously raised my voice. I said, "I'm keeping a canary outside." For some reason, after I said that, it suddenly went quiet on her end. The various talking sounds in the background stopped. "Lily." The person on the other end suddenly whispered in a hushed tone. "Elizabeth, how can you just say anything without asking where I am? What's wrong with me keeping a bird? Can't I say that?" "Lily, keep your voice down. Is it something to be proud of?" A few days after that phone call, I seemed to vaguely hear from others that I was keeping a canary. They even deliberately avoided me when discussing it. I was too busy to delve into what they were all talking about. After getting off work that day and returning home, I felt something was off indoors as soon as I entered. I looked up and saw a silent figure sitting on the living room sofa. The man I hadn't seen for half a month had returned without any notice. "Stephen." I walked over. "Didn't you say it would take another week to return?" Although we weren't close as a couple, I still knew his schedule. "You don't want me to come back?" What Stephen said was a bit strange. Huh. I didn't understand. Stephen opened his mouth as if to say something, but in the end he said nothing. I thought he looked unwell and reached out to touch his face. "Are you feeling sick?" "No fever either." The next moment, Stephen unexpectedly wrapped his arms around my waist and pulled me toward him. I was pressed onto his lap, straddling him. Before I could say anything, Stephen kissed me. It was a fierce kiss. I thought he just wanted a kiss, but as it went on, the kiss changed in nature. I struggled and said I hadn't showered, but he suddenly lifted me by my hips and stood up, heading toward the bathroom. Stephen had a habit of exercising. His muscle lines were well defined, and holding me with one arm was no problem for him. I didn't know what was wrong with him tonight. He was very rough. So rough that I cried. But he didn't stop. He kept asking me who he was. Stephen, husband, lover. He wasn't satisfied with any of these answers, but he still made me say them. The bathroom was steamy. I felt like floating duckweed without an anchor, clinging tightly to him. Physically exhausted in a daze, I heard Stephen whisper in my ear, "You are mine." Of course I was his. But I had no energy left to respond. It was as if he had never seen a woman in his life. It wasn't until the next day that I had the energy to ask him about his schedule. Stephen stood by the bed, looking at me deeply. "The project is in its final stage. I've handed over the work. I'll be in the country for this period. But didn't you say that project was very important, and you weren't comfortable unless you supervised it yourself? Stephen hummed in agreement. There's also something very important domestically, that I need to keep a close eye on myself. I didn't understand the metaphor in his words. Stephen started acting strangely from that day on. Logically, we were both very busy with work, but he came home much more frequently. Usually, by the time I got home, he was already there. Returning from work that day, I saw Stephen wearing an apron, bringing dishes out from the kitchen. I was taken aback. Not just because Stephen was cooking, but also because of how he was dressed. He was wearing a black tank top, his well-defined muscle lines blatantly displayed in the air. Combined with his face, the sexual tension hit me head-on. And he was even wearing an apron. A faint sense of him being a husband. It was very attractive. Stephen looked at me and said gently, "You're back? Go wash your hands and eat." This was the first time I ate a meal cooked by my husband. Due to our business marriage, we had no expectations of each other's domestic skills. These things were usually hired out. So I didn't know that Stephen had such culinary skills. "Is it good?" he asked. I nodded like pounding garlic. "It's delicious." Then he said something pointed. "Since the food at home is good, don't eat outside, it's not healthy." I only understood the surface meaning. How can that be? You're so busy. How can you cook after work every day? Stephen. That evening, while Stephen was showering, I called Lily. She sounded a bit furtive. "Your husband isn't nearby, right?" "No, he's not." "Why?" "Lily, how's that canary of yours?" "The canary? It's doing very well. It even rubs its head against my hand to act cute now." Every bird has a different personality, and my canary happened to be the affectionate type. "Elizabeth, I didn't expect you to like this type." For some reason, Lily let out a slightly perverted laugh. "Don't say I don't support you, but you are married. Even if it's a loveless business marriage, hiding something like this from your husband, you better keep it well hidden." "Hide what?" I was about to ask her what there was to hide when footsteps sounded behind me. Stephen had finished showering at some point and came out with just a towel around his waist. I saw a glistening drop of water slide down his chest until it disappeared into the towel. A silent sort of sexiness. He asked, "Who are you on the phone with?" "Lily," I said, belatedly showing him the phone screen, only to find that Lily had hung up at some point. Stephen's gaze fell on my phone screen. He didn't say anything but reached out and took the phone. He turned off the screen. He leaned down in front of me, his handsome face magnified, then he took my hand and raised it, pressing his face against it and gently nuzzling. While nuzzling, his eyes remained fixed on me. I heard him ask, "You like this?" At that moment, my mind went blank, and I didn't really hear what he said. Stephen and I had a business marriage, but we were also a real couple. We fulfilled our marital duties to each other. But I never expected the usually steady Stephen to act like this. "Stephen, did you hear my phone call?" His eyes darkened, his brow furrowed. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling. "Elizabeth, if you like this, I can do it too. Don't go looking outside." Stephen probably didn't know how sexy he looked right then, so much so that I only heard the first part of what he said. The next moment, his kiss surged over. In the midst of passion, I thought, I was talking about a bird on the phone. Why was Stephen competing with a bird? Did he really dislike birds that much? I gave up on the idea of keeping the canary at home. Stephen was especially different tonight. He was very clingy. He whispered many disorienting things in my ear. He didn't used to talk much in bed. But now every word was lewd. I sank into shame and pleasure with him. Who changed my husband's settings? Stephen's tricks increased. Not only did he come home frequently, but he also became extremely concerned about my schedule. After work that day, I went to my private villa to play with my bird. The little bird had been raised to be chubby, with a round little head. Although I wasn't the one taking care of it daily, it was still willing to fly onto my hand when I visited. I didn't keep it in a cage but had a bird room built that was suitable for it to live in. There were plants inside, sunlight streamed in, and even the temperature was optimal. When Stephen called, I was playing with the bird. Such a good baby, so attached to its owner. The call showed as connected. "Stephen." There was silence for a while before he spoke. "Where are you?" Lately, my arranged marriage husband had been particularly clingy. I instinctively thought he was urging me to return, so I said, "I'll be back right away." Stephen was silent again, then after a long time he said, "Okay." That night, during intimacy, he leaned close to my ear and said in a cold yet suppressed voice, "Owner, how was my performance?" My eyes widened. Wordless yet overwhelming shame washed over me. I couldn't believe why my husband of over half a year had become like this. It was like he was an incubus. My defenses crumbled under that address. In a daze, I heard him complain softly in my ear, "Why didn't you call me baby?" I was too sleepy, so the words felt like they were from a dream. My arranged marriage husband came up with more and more tricks, sometimes to a degree I could hardly handle. Lately, there had been many social engagements. I returned home very late and somewhat drunk. Stephen made a hangover soup. It was sweet, and he fed it to me. I glanced up at him and noticed his expression was gloomy. In my drunken state, I didn't think too much and reached out to smooth the furrow in his brow. "Don't frown." Stephen held me, looking unhappy. "Why are you so drunk?" I cupped his face, studied it for a moment, and said with a smile, "Husband." He paused. A few seconds later, I heard him sigh softly. "Why have you been sighing so much lately?" I asked him. Stephen's answer came after a pause. "Because I despise myself." I didn't understand. "You're so good. Why despise yourself?" Stephen had been a prodigy since childhood, the child other parents praised. I couldn't understand why he'd be so boastful. "Then do you love me?" he suddenly asked. Love. We weren't in bed at the moment. I didn't know how to face this question. I had feelings for him, I liked him, but I didn't know if it was love yet. In that moment of hesitation, Stephen stopped dwelling on the question. He knelt down to take off my high heels and carried me to the bathroom. I had been very embarrassed about him bathing me at first, but Stephen was always energetic in bed. Several times afterward, I was too lazy to move. Stephen personally cleaned me. Again and again. Habit is a terrifying thing. I liked Stephen's kisses. They were always lingering. But tonight, after placing me on the bed, he didn't kiss me immediately. My mind was somewhat muddled. In my bleary vision, I saw Stephen bring over his tie. His thumb stroked my wrist as he negotiated softly. "How about we play a game tonight?" I pointed at the tie and asked, "You're going to tie me up? Is that okay?" I shook my head. "I don't want to." Stephen then stopped. He looked at me and after a long while suddenly asked, "Then what if you tie me up?" The thought of tying Stephen to the headboard. Meeting his deep gaze, I found myself nodding as if possessed. Stephen, with his hands bound, looked like he was at my mercy, exceptionally arousing a sense of control. I didn't think I was a bad woman. But perhaps the alcohol had eroded my shame tonight. I really wanted to see him lose control. Stephen had also prepared a black strip. I used it to blindfold him. He couldn't see me, so I self-deceptively let loose. It was a very chaotic night. So much so that when I woke up the next day and remembered, I couldn't help but pull the covers over my head. Especially when I saw the marks left on Stephen's wrists. How could I be that kind of person? But last night Stephen, with his hands tied and eyes blindfolded, was so sexy. Stephen's suit jacket covered those marks, but the thought of him going to work, being the decisive Mr. Stephen, with marks all over his body, made my heart flutter. I was a little bad. In my view, this arranged marriage was slowly getting on track. My husband and I were relatively happy. At most, Stephen was a bit clingy and had high demands. There was a public charity gala. Both Stephen and I would attend, representing our respective families. I was wearing a custom-made evening gown, with the jewelry Stephen had given me after returning abroad adorning my neck and wrists, and my wedding ring was on. The charity gala was crowded, but it hadn't officially started yet. I looked around for my husband. I finally found him in a corner, along with his two friends, Jack and Oscar. They were talking to Stephen incessantly. Whether it was my imagination or not, they looked a bit frustrated. As I approached, Jack saw me first and walked toward me excitedly, as if he had something to argue with me about. From what I recalled, I didn't have much interaction with Jack and Oscar, nor any business conflicts, so there was no reason for any grudge. My confusion remained unresolved. Because Jack was held back by Stephen. I don't know what Stephen said, but Jack stopped, though his face was still cold. Stephen walked over to me. What were Jack and Oscar talking to you about? Was it related to me? I asked. Stephen didn't explain, he said. Just a misunderstanding, don't worry about it. But he didn't say what the misunderstanding was, clearly indicating he had something on his mind. At the charity gala, both of us were big spenders. Until the auctioneer introduced. The next item is a work by the famous artist June Lee. Today we have Ms. Lee here to explain the creative inspiration behind this painting. Please welcome. When I heard that name, I paused. It wasn't until June Lee, wearing a white dress, took the stage that I was sure I hadn't been mistaken. I couldn't help but glance beside me. June Lee, the daughter of a family of painters and calligraphers. If I remembered correctly, she grew up with Stephen. It was said before that their families wanted to arrange a marriage, but for some reason it fell through, and June went abroad not long after. I hadn't heard any news about June's return. Before Stephen and I married, she should have been closer to him. The young woman on stage spoke eloquently, her every move exuding a scholarly artistic style. She and I were complete opposites. I was ambitious, and my marriage wasn't for love but for career. Stephen just happened to be the best choice among them. Neither Stephen nor I bid on that painting, but I was sure the person on stage had cast her gaze toward him. Of course, the painting was eventually sold at a high price. Throughout the gala, especially after June appeared, the stares directed at Stephen and me increased. I knew people loved gossip, so I ignored it. But when I opened my phone, I saw that an acquaintance had uploaded a photo with June. The caption read, "The young lady returns home to bravely pursue love." Pursue love for whom? Holding my champagne glass, I looked around and realized that both Stephen and June had disappeared from my sight. Hesitating for a moment, I immediately started looking for them in the venue. Stephen could like someone else, or have unrequited love, but he couldn't cheat. I couldn't afford the embarrassment. When I found Stephen, he was indeed with June. A man and a woman alone at a corridor corner. The woman was crying pitifully. I was too far to hear clearly, only catching something about straying. I couldn't see Stephen's expression clearly. As I approached, I heard him say, "That's not true. You've misunderstood, and it's none of your business." I stopped a few steps away and called out, "Husband." Stephen turned. His gaze only showed a flicker when it landed on me. He didn't pay any more attention to his crying childhood friend and came over, taking my hand to leave. I asked him, "You're just leaving like that?" "Stephen, how else should I leave?" I leaned in and whispered, "She was crying." "Stephen, what does that have to do with us?" He said us. So I was confused again. Stephen didn't seem to have any affair with June. "She likes you," I stated with certainty. Stephen didn't deny it, but for some reason, he snorted coldly and said meaningfully, "People who become homewreckers do so willingly." His moral stance was so firm. I glanced at him for a moment. But I was still a bit curious. Why didn't you two end up together? I remembered the talk about the Fu and Lee families wanting to arrange a marriage a couple of years back. Stephen said tonelessly, "I didn't like her. But didn't he marry me through a business arrangement too?" It wasn't about liking or not liking either. Actually, I could sense that Stephen was in a bad mood. Maybe he had been since before the gala started, or perhaps after June appeared. He drank a lot that night. When we returned to the marital home, he leaned on my shoulder, unclear how drunk or sober he was. As his wife, caring about his mood was part of my duty. So I asked him, "What's really been going on with you lately?" Stephen looked up at me. On closer look, his eyes were slightly red, as if he'd been greatly wronged. He stared at me for a long time before finally speaking. "Elizabeth, when will you take me to see the canary you're keeping outside? What exactly attracts you to him?" The canary? How did Stephen find out about this? After realizing he might dislike birds, I never planned to tell him. In a business marriage, what's wrong with me secretly keeping a little bird outside? I was stunned for a moment before asking him in return, "You want to see?" "Yes." Stephen's eyelids drooped. I took his hand, called the driver who had just left, and pulled him up. "Let's go see it right now." God knows how adorable my little bird is. I was afraid Stephen wouldn't like it if he knew, so I hadn't even posted about it on social media. I'd only mentioned it to Lily, and she didn't seem to approve of me keeping a bird either. I once sent her a photo of the bird, and Lily replied, Where did this little fatty come from? Where is it fat? It's just fluffy. So cute it's puffed up. Throughout the journey, Stephen was still in low spirits. But just as we were about to arrive, he suddenly said, "I remember, this is the villa you used to live in. You let him stay here?" "Yes. Is there a problem? Did he not like it? Was I supposed to kick my little bird out?" "It's just a little bird. It's a bit noisy, but what's wrong with that?" Stephen said gloomily. "I've never even been here." I didn't quite understand what he meant. I owned more than one property. He just hadn't been to this one, but he'd been to others. After getting out of the car, Stephen, though half drunk, firmly interlaced his fingers with mine as we walked in. Aunt Wong, who had been woken up, saw it was us, greeted us and went back to sleep. Stephen became resentful again. "You even arranged for someone to take care of him specifically." I finally understood. He was jealous. But why on earth would anyone be jealous of a perfectly fine, plump little bird? Is a drunk man really this unreasonable? I grabbed Stephen and headed straight for the eco birdhouse in the backyard, opening the door and walking in. This birdhouse is somewhat large. But as soon as we entered, a chirp sounded from the branches, followed by a series of birdsong. It was actually quite pleasant. Just a bit noisy. The little bright yellow creature on the branch suddenly flapped its wings, flew a few times, and landed in my palm. I presented the bird in my palm to Stephen like a treasure. "Look, isn't it adorable?" Stephen seemed stunned. "This is the canary you've been keeping?" "Yes, a Gloucester canary." I stroked the little bird's head. Maybe it was my imagination, but it seemed even fluffier. I need to remind Aunt Wong to pay attention to its feeding. Why keep the bird a secret? Stephen's tone was full of confusion. I looked at him, then at my adorable little bird. "It's because I heard you dislike canaries, so I kept it outside and just visit occasionally." Stephen looked at the bird in my hand and murmured, "I thought." "You thought what?" I narrowed my eyes. Even I, as obtuse as I am, could tell from Stephen's words that he meant a different kind of canary. Stephen was silent for a moment. I stared at him. This man, who was so decisive and efficient outside, rarely showed a guilty conscience. After interrogating him for a long time, I finally got the truth from him. "So you came back early from abroad, have been home so often lately, and even all because you thought I was keeping a man outside?" I had noticed the changes in Stephen recently, but it just seemed like he was coming home more often and being clingier. I hadn't picked up on much more. I was even more puzzled. "Why didn't you tell me the day you returned?" Stephen's gaze then took on another emotion. "I didn't dare." His eyes were still red as he leaned in, burying his face in the crook of my neck. "If I laid my cards on the table, and you chose him over me, what would I do?" Hearing this, I really wanted to shake some sense into Stephen. "You're my husband. Who else would I choose but you?" Halfway through, I felt a bit deflated. Forget it, it's partly my fault too. I thought he disliked birds. He thought I had a lover. With the facade of the arranged marriage between us, neither of us asked too many questions. There was a serious communication problem between Stephen and me. The little bird was settled in its nest on the branch, chirping for a long time. It was cute. Stephen and I went upstairs. At this hour, naturally, we weren't planning to go out again. Upstairs, only the bedroom I slept in before marriage was cleaned daily, so resting there directly was fine. But there were no change of clothes for a man here. At most, I could lend him my towel. It was too late. I didn't say much and went into the bathroom first. Just as I stepped out, I was pulled into an embrace. Stephen whispered in my ear, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have misunderstood you. If you're angry, you can hit me or scold me, but don't ignore me." His body carried the fresh scent of just having showered. A towel was wrapped around his waist, but the rest of him wasn't covered by fabric. His pectoral muscles, abs, and various workout marks were clearly visible. Very beautiful. I couldn't even tell if he was apologizing or seducing me. "Stephen, sit down." I pressed him onto the bed, stood in front of him, gaining a height advantage, and looked directly into his eyes. "If you thought I was cheating before, what did all your behavior these past days mean?" Stephen also stared straight at me, his voice somewhat low. "I was trying, through my efforts, to make you return to the family. So all the seduction during this time was to show me that the grass isn't greener on the other side. In your eyes, am I so morally bankrupt?" I looked at him. "I'm sorry." Stephen apologized again. I stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. Stephen, do you like me? Between a man and a woman, becoming husband and wife only requires sufficient mutual benefit. But feelings cannot be forced. Between Stephen and me, it started with us sitting together discussing the benefits this marriage could bring each other. Before marriage, we actually had an agreement. If we met someone we liked after marriage, we would divorce peacefully once things stabilized. But Stephen was too good. He personally oversaw every detail of the wedding. Early in the marriage, aside from being busy, he fulfilled all his duties as a husband. As for intimacy, when the mood was right, it happened naturally. I was very satisfied with Stephen, even if this marriage wasn't based on love. Yes, I like you, I heard him say. Stephen took my hand and said softly, we are husband and wife. Even if someone outside briefly caught your attention, it must be their problem. I was afraid that if I spoke openly, there would be no turning back. He looked straight into my eyes. But at that moment, I was stunned. Stephen was undoubtedly a prodigy. I never imagined he could be so humble. He stood up, leaned down to gently nuzzle my nose, and kissed my lips. Elizabeth, you can be angry, punish me, but you can't abandon me. I paused. It's partly my fault too. I shouldn't have asked others about your likes and dislikes. I should have asked you directly. If I had been clear with Stephen from the start, this misunderstanding probably wouldn't have lasted so long. Communication between husband and wife should be more honest. Stephen kissed my lips again. His kiss was wet and lingering. He said, it's my fault. Admitting mistakes and asking for forgiveness are things many adults never learn. But Stephen naturally pressed my hand against his body, saying that doing whatever I wanted to him was my right. The atmosphere was just right. Stephen's recent gloomy mood had been resolved. I didn't blame him. After all, given the misunderstanding, his actions could be considered very magnanimous, even abnormally so. It probably wasn't right for me to blame him either. But this wasn't our marital home. There were no supplies to support me doing whatever I wanted. Stephen pressed me onto the bed, kissed my eyes gently and said, it's okay, I'll serve you. His kisses trailed downward. I remember on our wedding night, he wasn't this skilled. He was inexperienced yet still enticing. Now he knew me well. The next morning, when I woke up, no one was beside me. After washing up and going downstairs, I found Stephen feeding the bird in the birdhouse. The canary, which usually obediently nestled in my palm, was also affectionate with Stephen. I walked in. The little bird, which had been on Stephen's hand, fluttered its wings and landed in my palm. I stroked its little head. Good baby. The bird. Chirp, 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 chirp. Stephen looked over. So, baby is it too? Baby is the name I gave it. Stephen fell silent. I also remembered something and leaned closer to ask, so that time you called me owner? Before I could finish, Stephen stopped my words with a kiss. It wasn't a deep kiss. I still looked at him with curved eyes. Jealous of a little bird, you've really outdone yourself, Stephen. He stared at me, then suddenly spoke again. Owner. My eyes widened. It was daytime, not in bed. Hearing him say that, I instinctively looked around. If anyone heard, both he and I would lose face. Stephen lowered his head. I think you quite like that title in bed. After clearing up the misunderstanding with Stephen, I specifically made a video call to the originator of the rumor. Lily, on the other end, stared dumbfounded at the bright yellow bird in my hand. Isn't this the little fatty you sent me before? This is the canary you've been keeping? I nodded. The next second, the person on the other end laughed uncontrollably. Ha 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 ha, I'm dying of laughter. And you have the nerve to laugh? Lily laughed while apologizing. Sorry, my fault, but I really didn't spread it. That day when you called, I was at a gathering. They were too noisy, so I told them to be quiet. I had just put you on speaker when you said you were keeping a canary. You and Stephen are always apart. It made sense for you to have a confidant outside. You know me, my mind is always in the gutter. Dirty-minded people think dirty thoughts. As for those others, needless to say, they couldn't wait to grab popcorn. I did say you were joking, but they didn't listen and spread it. It was true that Lily had loved all kinds of online literature since her teens, especially the kind that required clicking through various links. Don't worry, I'm responsible for this. I'll definitely restore your reputation. I don't know how Lily spread the word, but within a couple of days, it seemed like the whole world knew I was keeping a bright yellow canary. This time, they really knew it was a bird. A couple of days later, Jack and Oscar, who had previously seemed like they wanted to confront me, suddenly came to apologize. Stephen and I were temporarily staying at the villa where I kept the bird. Jack looked at the bird obediently sitting in my palm and asked enviously, "Sis, where did you buy this bird?" Later, I heard from Stephen that Jack had also kept birds before, but unlike mine, his birds liked to peck him. I rolled my eyes at him. Found it on the road. I hadn't forgotten how indignant they were on Stephen's behalf at the charity gala that night. Probably Stephen's sudden return was also due to his good brothers tipping him off. Spreading rumors without verification. I was being generous by not kicking them out. Stephen stood up to see them out. "All right, if there's nothing else you can go. We won't keep you for dinner." After they left, Stephen came over to look at me. "Still angry? If you are, you can take it out on me. I don't have a penchant for domestic violence. Why would I hit him?" But I still glared at him. Stephen laughed. The little bird in the room fluttered up, landed on his shoulder, and pooped on his custom-made expensive shirt. The air froze for a moment. I laughed, stroking the bird that had flown back. "Good baby." Stephen looked somewhat helpless, but he also smiled. Some people believed the canary story. Some didn't. They seemed to prefer that I really had a lover outside. June was one of the non-believers. On the night of Stephen's mother's birthday banquet, I went to the restroom. Just after coming out, I was stopped by June, who looked at me coldly. "Elizabeth, if you don't like Stephen, why did you marry him?" When did I ever say I didn't like him? Arranged marriages require matching social status, but you also have to be able to stomach the person. But I smiled at the moment. Stephen is the only son of the Fu family. Do I need to list all the benefits of marrying him, Miss Lee? June showed an "I knew it" expression. "So you're just after his family's money and power?" I shook my head. Of course not just that. I wasn't interested in dragging it out with her. Just as I was about to leave, I heard her say, "Don't think you've hidden it well. I'll eventually find the lover you're hiding outside and expose your true colors to the Fu family." How do you find someone who doesn't exist? I turned to look at her, crossed my arms and said with interest, "Then you'll have to look carefully. After all, Stephen is tall, handsome, good-tempered, fit, and rich. Anyone worse probably wouldn't interest me." This time, June didn't fly into a rage. Her gaze shifted to behind me. I turned and happened to meet Stephen's eyes. "You were gone for a while, and you weren't answering your phone, so I came to look for you," Stephen said. I was detained by his unwanted admirer. "I'd like to leave, but who asked our Mr. Fu to be so charming? Someone is fighting for your honor, saying I'm unfaithful and not worthy of you." "Stephen." He took my hand, looked at June and said, "June, I believe the Lee family's values do not include pursuing married men. Please have some self-respect." June's eyes reddened instantly. "Brother Fu, why?" "We knew each other first, and my family proposed the marriage alliance first. You said you weren't considering marriage then, and I said I'd wait for you. But not even 2 years later you married her." Stephen remained unmoved by the beauty's tears. "Why?" "Because I was the one eagerly waiting for her to choose me as her husband." June was stunned. I was stunned too. Stephen said, "I rejected you very clearly and never asked you to wait. I like Elizabeth, so I married her. It's that simple." On the way back, I kept glancing at Stephen. Too curious, I poked his arm. "What do you mean, waiting for me to choose you as my husband?" Stephen raised his hand to cover his eyes, as if trying to avoid the question. But in the end he couldn't resist me and confessed, "I liked you. I've liked you for a long time." This answer was unexpected. I thought Stephen started liking me after we got married. "Why didn't you pursue me before?" I asked with a smile. Stephen's expression then turned somewhat resentful. "Do you remember what you said when rejecting other pursuers before? You said you weren't interested in dating. You only cared about your career. An arranged marriage was also a way to advance one's career." I paused. I had indeed said something similar before to deal with pursuers. I'd said, "You didn't even try. How did you know I wasn't interested?" "Maybe I just wasn't interested in them." "You're so good-looking. Maybe we could have had a campus romance back in school. Stephen. He fell silent. He seemed a bit regretful. After marriage, teasing my husband was actually quite fun. But that night, he was very rough in bed again. I tugged on the silver chain around his neck, pulling him down to kiss me, and whispered in his ear, "Senior Fu." We went to the same high school. He was a year above me. The man on top of me paused for a moment. Then his kiss became even more lingering. I coaxed and threatened him into confessing when he started liking me and what he liked about me. Stephen finally said after a long time, "I admired you in high school. Later, when you were an adult, you had many suitors. I disliked them. You are excellent. I admire strength." I was very satisfied with this answer. I kissed his eyes. What a coincidence, I admire strength too. At the age of 29, I gave birth to a daughter. By then, I was firmly established in the company under the Xie family, and Stephen was too. We loved this child very much. After work, we would wash and disinfect our hands immediately upon returning home, then hold the child. At 1 year old, the child was plump and adorable. She recognized people and would smile when she saw Stephen and me. Then, her father and I often stayed up late imagining her future, but in the end, we only had one wish. May she be safe and happy.
Epilogue, Stephen's perspective. When I realized I liked Elizabeth, I wasn't too surprised. She was beautiful, excellent, and had a good personality. It was normal for people to like her. We often appeared in the same spaces. Although we weren't close and weren't in the same grade, we would give speeches together and participate in competitions together. It was hard for me not to notice her. But many people liked her, whether superficially or deeply, and she never accepted any of them. I didn't really consider myself a loyal person, but even after I graduated from university and joined the family company, no one else made my heart flutter. When the Xie family was selecting a husband for her, I went back home. Soon after, my parents visited to discuss the marriage alliance between the two families. She agreed. After marriage, it was mostly as I had imagined, but there were differences. I knew Elizabeth didn't marry for love. I had once admired her rationality, but I also often felt insecure because of it. Until someone told me she had a lover. Friends advised me to get a divorce. Why should I? I was her legal husband. Why should I step aside and make way? I adjusted my work and did a lot of research on the topic of how to seduce a woman. I knew she took the bait, but I still felt a thorn in my heart. I had to pull out that thorn. So I finally mustered the courage to talk to her openly about that topic. I wanted to keep that man away from my marriage. Unexpectedly, Elizabeth was excited and took me to see the canary she was raising overnight, a little plump bird. I had to admit I was a jealous husband. After all, I was even jealous of a bird. That thorn disappeared without a trace. Because Elizabeth said she fell in love with me after we got married. My wife said she loves me. My wife loves me.